Well, hello there, guys. This is new DM Ariel coming to you once again on the YouTube and platform, the YouTube platform. And today, I wanted to go ahead and discuss a topic that I've been meaning to talk about, and that is what you see here is the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook. Uh, Book One, because I think they made three of them for fourth edition, and then to compare and contrast. And I kind of started to do this on my blog a couple years ago with the various fourth edition core books versus the new 5e core books. But I sort of fell behind on my blogging, and I wanted to kind of pick that back up. But I noticed going back that I had not really done a comparison between the fourth edition uh, core books, especially the player's handbook, versus the new 5e. Well, not new anymore, but it's comparatively speaking, the 5e book. And I wanted to undertake that, kind of take it slow. Go. I reread the first three chapters and made some notes of each of the handbooks, and with the goal of seeing, okay, which one do I like better? Is one actually better than the other? And I should probably preface this video. See, it's gonna be a series, and I'm gonna be looking at all the core books, the main core books, because there's multiple versions of the DM's guide for both fourth edition and 5e, even though they don't call it DM guide. Fourth edition, which has the Dungeon Master's Guide 2, which I do own, and there's multiple versions of the of the Player's Handbook rather, and a fifth edition also has multiple. They did eventually split up their core books into multiple volumes, but they don't really call it that. They're just like supplement books. Like you have the fifth edition PHB, the Dungeon Master's Guide, of course, and the Monster Manual. But then you also have books like Xanathar's Guide to Everything, the Everything series, which I've talked to a little bit and people that play 5e know these books. Xanathar's Guide, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, books like that. So there's a Monster Manual. I know for a fact, in my opinion, that I think the fourth edition Monster Manual is superior. At least Monster Manual 1 is superior to the 5e Monster Manual. And maybe at a later time, I will explain why I believe that to be the case. But it's not even a contest. I mean, I think that if you put them side to side and you really take a look at both volumes, the fourth edition one wins. In my view. And I haven't I think in previous videos I've talked about fourth edition. I think if you, during the video that I made a couple weeks ago about the box sets, I talk about the various starter sets for each edition, and I kind of want to take that further into this series and compare the core books, like I said. And today I'm just gonna look at the first three chapters of the Player's Handbook for book fourth and fifth edition. But I did want to say that there's a lot of people out there. Fourth edition still gets a lot of hate. It was a very short edition from 2008 to 2014 when fifth edition came out, and honestly, I'm not one of these people that hates on fourth edition. I know there's people I know in the community. I think Professor Dungeon Master has called it like a bad marriage. It's like compared it to a bad marriage, and doesn't really talk about it that much. But I don't feel that way. I think that I think there's some really good things that came out of fourth edition, and it's really kind of a shame that it gets that much hate for various factors, and we'll talk about that at some point in more detail. But right now, I'm gonna focus on just like I said, the players have the PHB for fourth edition and fifth edition, and the first three chapters, and then at a later time, I'll further along the line we'll go into. I think it's only like about 10 or 11 chapters to each one. The fourth edition one, I think it's shorter. It's 10 chapters versus the 5e book, which is 11 chapters long, but it's not a big difference. So we'll take it one at a time, three chapters at a time to be more exact. And so I hope you stick around, and I hope you find this uh, both elucidating and entertaining. I know I definitely had fun going back and looking at some of the differences between the two systems, and or the two core books as they present the respective systems. Um, so yeah, that's let's start off with what we have here. A fourth edition book. There's somebody selling it on eBay for $16 and shipping, which it's kind of a steal if you ask me. If you don't own this book, just for the historical nature, I would pick it up. But if you were ever curious about running up or taking part in a fourth edition game, then it's also a valuable resource. But at any rate, that's what the topic of today's video will be. Okay, here we go, guys. So the fourth edition player's handbook, uh, in respect to the races that are available for players, races and classes. Really, there's 8 races, and I know that we're going to call it species now, but I think species sounds stupid. I still call it races. But 8 races and 8 classes is what they offered, and which was uh, one less than the fifth edition. Uh, uh, the fifth edition Player's Handbook, which offered 9 races. But it's funny. I mean, it's interesting because they kind of swapped a couple out. The races in fourth edition are the Dragonborn, the Dwarf, the Eladrin, Elf, Half Elf, Halfling, Human, and Tiefling, and they're exactly the same in fifth edition, except with the exception that they have the gnome and they have the half orc. And there is no half orc presented in the player's handbook, at least in the first player's handbook of fourth edition. But they do supplement it with a Eladrin race, which we can see here. And the Eladrin are kind of um like high elves, or haughty elves. I don't know how to describe them. Basically, it says graceful warriors and wizards at home in the eldritch twilight of the Feywild. So they're Fey creatures, and they have Fey origin. As you can see, they are also they're like just a different type of elf. And when I think of Eladrin, if I were to roleplay it, it would be sort of kind of like the typical what people think like Lord of the Rings type elf, where they have some of them can be kind of snooty, kind of like I guess the fifth edition equivalent would be like a high elf, because in the fifth edition they have the subclasses, and fourth edition didn't really have this. Fourth edition was more uh, like the different tiers. And so and then when you get to they had prestige classes, I should say, which was something that well, I take it back. Prestige classes were third edition. Fourth edition kind of built on the idea of prestige classes, but it was more like segmented into the different tiers. So they had the heroic tier for characters that are starting out up to level 10, and then when you get to 11, you get your Paragon path, and then finally when you get to, because there were 30 levels as opposed to the 20 levels for 5e, and when you get to like the last tier, which I think is level 21 to 30, that's where you get your ultimate tier, your divine type tier. I forget what it's called, but it's basically the idea that you're kind of like the old basic Beckby, where you had your immortals, and sort of like you transcend the heroic mortal coil thing, and you become kind of like more of a deity, more of a immortal type uh, being. So, but those are the races, and in fourth edition, you do have the Eladrin, which is an interesting thing. Now, the first couple of chapters, I made some notes, and for 4E, they talk about the core mechanic, which is how to roll the d20 and how to add your bonuses and stuff. Fifth edition is the same, except they added the advantage versus disadvantage d20, and if you play 5e, the advantage disadvantage mechanic, which is pretty cool, I think. But we didn't have that in fourth edition, but we did have the second chapter in the book talks about for the PHB. For 4E talks about how to make a character exactly the same as 5E. Um, and so they had a race, your class. So you pick three things: your race, your class, and your role. And the role was unique to the fourth edition the fourth edition game mechanics, because people, it was this kind, it's kind of like an MMO concept that people don't really like because they feel it's kind of video gamey, where you have your tank and your DPS classes. So if you play MMOs like World of Warcraft or EverQuest or something like that, then um um what would it be now? It would like Final Fantasy or something, where again you have your tanks, which are your warriors up front doing all the damage, that type of thing, and you have your DPS support classes, and then you have your wizards, which are your kind of squishy characters, which don't really wear a lot of armor, but they're powerful as they go up in levels, and they have to stay back in a melee fight, so they do range attacks, that kind of idea. Um, and so they had the roles. So they had the strikers, and they have I forget what all the roles are now, but basically each character, in addition to being a specific race and getting some racial bonus, which you're not really going to have anymore. Starting with 5e, the later the 2023, 2024, they got rid of the racial bonuses, which you may or may disagree with. I don't specifically think it's a good thing, but that's the direction they're going. And it started later in the lifespan of the 5e. But I digress. The roles in 4e were specifically designed to what your character could do. Like there was the warlord class, for example, very similar to the bard, where he gave inspiration in the battlefield and therefore had a specific role. Because fourth edition, as you know, if you played it or if you read about it or know about it, and I've talked about this a little bit before, so I'm not gonna get too much into it, but it's more tactical. I almost wish they had named it something else other than D&D, and if they had just called it like Dungeons and Dragons Tactics, or because it's very battle oriented. You almost necessarily have to have a grid to play it, and I think fourth edition gets a bad rap also in this respect, where they talk about, well, it's more grid based and they're getting away from the RPG, the role playing aspects of the game, but fifth edition brought it back. But I don't think that's fair because actually, if you look back at the 3.5 PHB, the grid play actually was pretty defined, but in third edition, 3.5 for sure. So it's not something that necessarily was unique or invented, or it wasn't an innovation in the fourth edition of the game. But anyway, getting back to the PHB, the first couple of chapters also talk about the attack powers and utility powers, which is also unique to fourth edition versus every other edition of the game, where you have the different classes having their unique powers. They call it powers, and I think that turned off people as well. The mechanic was you have your daily powers, which are your most powerful, or utilities. They call it utilities for the fighters of some different classes, but you have your daily powers or utilities, which they're so powerful you can only use them like once a day, one adventuring day, and then you have your more common encounter powers you can use multiple times during your encounter, and then you also have your less powerful uh, powers. Kind of similar to the cantrips, where if the spellcasters have the level 0 spells for your cantrips, you had that for the different attack powers that the different character classes would have in fourth edition. So it goes over. It doesn't like really spend a whole lot of time in the first two chapters. It just describes it and how it works. But as you go deeper into the PHB for fourth edition, then you find out more about that. And then it talks about ability scores and talks about how to generate them. Every edition does that. So there's different methods of either allocating points or rolling the dice. I always go for the rolling for your stats because I think it's more fun to roll dice than just pick, point by. But if you're in a hurry and you're just doing some pre-gens, you might go the other way. And it talks about alignment, which I think is really interesting because the fifth edition player's handbook doesn't really even touch alignment that much in the. I don't think it's unless I'm mistaken. I don't remember it being in the first couple of chapters, but the fourth edition one does. And now it seems like a lot of people in the modern games are kind of trying to toy away with this idea of getting rid of alignment altogether, or not really making it a focal point, which I think is a mistake. I think alignment really helps not only define your role, or define a way that you want to play your character. If you're evil, I think it could be streamlined, and that's fine. If you just want to do the original game, there were three alignments. There was like lawful, and there was neutral, and there was evil. And then we got into the chaotic neutral, and added more to it. So which is okay, but I think that doing away with it doesn't really work, especially when you have your character classes like the clerics. As you know, the clerics are defined by the deities. Their powers are divine, as opposed to arcane, which is like what the wizards use. And so the deities, alignment really helps to determine your character and which god you're going to be deriving. Your character is going to be uh, an acolyte of a specific deity, and the player's handbook for fourth edition really gets into that, and it actually lists a bunch of on the first chapter, I think, or chapter they go at the end. There's like a whole section of alignment, and there's also like the different deities that you can follow. I think there's like 9 or 10 of them, or maybe more. I can't remember. There's less than a dozen. It doesn't really talk about the evil ones, because the evil deities, like Asmodeus from the Nine Hells, and the other evil aligned deities are described. They describe them, but doesn't go full depth into them. That information is in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Which I guess it makes sense if you're running a campaign and you have your world building. Then the idea is, well, that's going to be more helpful to the DM than to the players. The players just need to pick one if they're just playing. Most of the time, they're not going to be encouraged to pick a chaotic evil or an evil character, or therefore they're not going to really need to know a lot of information, at least right off the bat, about the evil deities that are also in the universe. And then what else is in? Oh, the different tiers of play. I talked about a little bit. It talks about experience points, how to get through the different levels. So you start with your heroic tier, which is levels 1 to 10, and then you go on to your paragon tier, which is levels 11 through 21, I believe, and then the final tier, which I always forget the name of it. But it's that ultimate deity, divine. You're just I forget what it's called, but it's like 21 to 30. It's the last tier where your character is not even more, not even a mortal anymore. You kind of, transcend into that special class of character. Uh, like I said, kind of like Immortal said back in the Beckney days, but this also touches on a little bit on equipment, or how AC works, like how your armor class works, and some weapons, and it doesn't even go into. Oh, it does have like one paragraph about backgrounds, which is on page 24 of the PHB for 4E, but it doesn't really talk about backgrounds that much, because again, um, I think they left it sort of open ended, so that people, if you want to go into your character's background, this is something that 5e changed, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the 5e um, for that specific chapter for 5e. But the backgrounds, they're just sort of there to help you roleplay. Really, they're not really integral to the way the game system is set up, the way it is in 5e, which really makes it your background gives you like extra skills and extra equipment even. So and a whole sometimes a whole bunch of motivation on how to play your character. And there is one thing though that the fourth edition character um, or player's handbook has that I do like, but that is not included in the 5e one. It's like after they give you all the mechanics, like your ability scores and your powers. Oops, let me go back to the Aladdin clicked off the Aladdin. Um, oh, here are the three tiers. So just out of curiosity, what is the third tier in fourth edition called? It is called this is the end of chapter 3 where it talks about the three tiers: the heroic tier, the paragon tier, and the epic. It's called the epic tier. That's what it's called. I don't know why I always forget, but that you're an epic character now. You have all the power that you would ever have. And see, you can see here is the chapter which gives you a lot, all the details on the gods, which I've an alignment, you know. And let me go back to where they talk about the actual character classes, so I can highlight um, how it is a little bit different than we have it in the new set. So, like for example, here is the paladin, right? And it gives you the class traits and it gives you the key abilities and all that stuff. But then at the very end, it gives you like a little some flavor text and information about how the paladins work, or you know what they're all about, and then uh, trying to find. I think paladin is not the best choice because they have so many prayer. They call them prayers, so their powers are like they don't call them powers like the other classes. They're prayers. I think the clerics are prayers too. Um, uh, class features. Oh wait, I went too far. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be in races. Yeah, because these are the classes, you know, and I want to go to races because we're talking about just the first three chapters. So that's the thing. Also, that player's handbook on 4E, they have a whole separate chapter on the races, which is chapter 4. But in the third chapter is when they focus only on the races. So and how do you play your race, you know, and how to role play your race. So let me go back up there and highlight what I really like about the um the way they do races. So we'll look at the tiefling because that's a good one. You can find tieflings in 5e, of course. But uh, play a tiefling if you want to be a hero. So it tells you, okay, you want to play this race. If you want to be a member of a race that favors the warlock, warlord, and rogue classes. So not only do they tell you you can play this race if you want to role play or do this, but also they recommend a class, which is great. I think the 5e one does that as well. I'll have to take a quick look. Um, when we get there. But and then one thing that I really like about the way 4E does it is they give you these adventures. So it says Tiefling adventures. 3 sample Tiefling adventures are described below, and they give you 3 sample adventures, which is great. I mean, if you're a dungeon master, that's helpful. Maybe not so much. Even if you're a player, you know they included it in the player's handbook because they want the players to be able to have inspiration on how to play these races, and if they don't already know that, you know, if they don't have an idea. So I really like that. You don't find that in the fifth edition one because they focus more on background. So we'll take a look at backgrounds. Excuse me. We'll take a look at the PHB for 5e and take a look at how they do it, how they present the same material, but as it relates to their system. All right, guys. So real quick, now let's get into the player's handbook for 5e. The one correction I will make from earlier was when I talked about what's in the initial chapters of the fourth edition, and I said that it does talk about equipment and armor class. It does that, but later chapters. It doesn't do it in the first opening 2 chapters. And I did say that there was the explanation of the 3 pillars of adventure. Actually, I got confused. There is no explanation of the 3 pillars that happens in this one in fifth edition. They talk about the three pillars of adventure, which is exploration, social interaction, and combat. That's what the right off the bat they talk about it in 5e, and on the player's handbook for 5e, and they also the first chapter talks about dice and the D20 system, and it does talk about the difference between advantage and disadvantage. That specific mechanic that was an innovation of 5e, advantage and disadvantage, um, which players really like. And it talks about the different how to build a character, just like the fourth edition book. And it does talk about the tiers of play though, because unlike fourth edition where you had the three different tiers, the heroic tier, the paragon, and the epic, and it went all the way to level 30. This 5e, as everybody knows who plays it, only goes up to 20 levels. So there's 20 levels, and it does talk about a little bit about equipment and AC and how equipment and shields and stuff like that affect your AC. Um, and there are as I mentioned before, there are nine races described in the first couple of chapters. I think it chapter 3 goes into the classes, if I remember. Well, we can take a quick look. I guess don't have to really guess about it. We have it right in front of us, and we can look um, what what's in the book. As you can see. So yeah, chapter 2 goes into the races, and there's additional races. I think there's one more. Well, that's actually there's two that you can't find in the fourth edition one, which is the half orc. They brought the half orc back, and there's also the well, there have tieflings of the gnome. It's the gnome, so they have tieflings in both, but this one has the gnome. But there is no eladrin. Instead, they have the different type of elves. Um, so if you go into the section about, because the first chapter is, like I said, it's first couple of chapters is about how to build a character and what the different races are. Um, uh, and you have the different type of elves. So you have your elf traits, but you also have your describes the high elf, which is kind of similar to the kind of akin to what the Eladrin is in fourth edition, and then you have your wood elves and your dark elves, which are the drow. I think I found it interesting that they include the drow here because most of the time, drow had not been really a big. They're usually most used as antagonists, right? They're evil and they worship Loth, and so they weren't really like a playable race for a long time. But you can play them in fifth edition. And then they have halflings. So it goes into the different races. We looked at the Dragonborn for fourth edition, and it's kind of the same thing, um, with a few exceptions. They do have these little sidebars, like you see here, about the different races that are common or uncommon. They go a little bit about the lore of each race. There you have your gnomes, and you have your you know, tiefling, things like that. So it's very heavily based on well, for the early chapters on how to build your character and what they have, what's available. Let me go back. Just go back just a little bit so I can because that's mostly chapter 2 of the book, the different races. Um, and the first chapter is just step by step characters. So it talks a little bit about skills, ability scores, and modifiers. How do you attribute those? And then what I found interesting too is character advancement, and that's on page right before chapter 2. I don't remember exactly what. Can I make this bigger? Yeah, there's a way to make this bigger on this slide. Oh, here we go. So I can zoom in. So you see that well, I guess it's on this page right before chapter 2 at the end of chapter 1 where it talks about character advancement, and it gives you your different experience points by level, and your proficiency bonus, which is something that was added to 5e, where if your characters get proficiency bonuses for the depending on what level they are. But what I find interesting is that most of the groups I played with don't even use the experience point system in 5e. To be quite honest, I mean they are so used to doing what they call the milestone, and the milestone was an innovation for the 5e system, where you don't have to worry about allocating experience points. Um, and it's just after every X number of encounters, then you can just award the characters a level, and they keep going. In fact, a lot of the 5e books are so episodic, and they're kind of railroady, where you take the characters level by level. So there's a module, for example, and it'll be for levels 1 to 5. And this happens in fourth edition too, but in fifth edition it's really defined in terms of like you can a lot of them just encourage the milestone, so that there's one less thing. And that's the thing, that fifth edition is so streamlined. They figured that's one less thing for the DM to worry about. I kind of appreciate that. I mean, I'm not against the milestone system. I just think it's interesting that there was a heavy focus on it earlier in 5e, but then when they started publishing their pre-made modules, and if you want to just railroad through a specific adventure, they tend to be episodic. Chapter 1 they do this, chapter 2 they do this, and they go on like that to the end of the module. If you follow it word by word, I never do. I usually just like most DMs, just cherry pick the best parts or parts that I want to use, and just sort of tweak them to my own specific homebrew adventure. But you're free to do what you want. But I just find it interesting that that's sort of a system that was in the player's handbook early on, but it sort of kind of went by the wayside as they published. Wizards of the Coast started to publish more and more material for later materials for 5e. So that's all I have for today. The first couple of chapters, 2 or 3 chapters of both the fourth edition and fifth edition players handbooks. We're gonna look at later chapters in later videos. But what do you guys think? For me, I'd have to say that which one is better? I mean, they're different systems, so it's kind of like apples and oranges. If you can't do a straight comparison. But to me, I think the fourth edition book is slightly better in introducing the system. It takes its time especially when he talks about the different races. And again, there's been some changes to fifth edition where they don't even have like racial bonuses anymore. But it does give you some character explanations on the races and how to role play them, and also it gives you that great explanation, like adventure. What is it, like suggestions of adventures, which is great, because if I don't know how to play again a Dragonborn, the book tells you, here's a sample adventure. This is how you play this race, and I really like that. And it's not something that's really seen in the 5e player's handbook. So they're both great, but I kind of nudge towards the 4e PHB a little bit more. So thank you guys, and I'll continue the series both on the YouTube channel and on the blog. I'll leave a description, I'll put that in the description, because I might get lazy and it takes a while to edit some of these, so I might just do some chapters in the blog like I've done in the past, and then then we'll continue comparing these core both systems. I think it's an interesting. If anything, it's an interesting review or look at how the slight differences between the two systems. Thank you. I hope if you like this material, go ahead and like and or subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys very, very soon with the next set of chapters.